The first Republican House member to talk impeachment. The frontrunner to replace the president made some big news with his latest rally, and Buttigieg's Fox News town hall. Was it a success? By the way, even harder to say Buttigieg's than it is just to say the name.
Plural. Team Rising is here. They're going to drop some knowledge on us. Jennifer Holdsworth is a Democratic strategist and the Senior VP of Issues Management at MWWPR Public Affairs. Emily Jashinsky is a culture editor at the Federalist. She previously served as a spokeswoman for the Young America's Foundation. Welcome to you both.
Ladies.
Good morning.
So, Emily, what do you make of the Jennifer Rubin of Congress calling for Trump's impeachment?
Come on now. Here, roll the tweet. Let's play
of Congress.
I do love your laugh.
Congressman Justin Amash tweeting, "Here are my principal conclusions. Attorney General Barr has deliberately misrepresented Mueller's report.
True.
President Trump is engaged in impeachable conduct.
Also true.
Partisanship has eroded our systems of checks and balances, and few members of Congress have read the report."
I think we can all agree on that last one, right?
Oh,
yes.
number 4.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
So this kind of reminds me of when there were all these headlines last week when Tomi Lahren came out with this supposedly shocking take on abortion. I mean,
Right.
Justin Amash is anti-Trump. He has no issues with bucking the GOP establishment. So this is not surprising. This is perfectly in character for Justin Amash. Frankly, I think it's healthy for the Republican Party to have somebody that's willing to make this argument, because I think there's legitimacy to parts of this argument. I don't agree with it, but I think it's perfectly healthy for it to be in the GOP. Not surprising at all. I mean, I was reading a Politico story on it that referred to this as an extraordinary
remarkable
development. There's nothing extraordinary about this.
Yeah.
It's perfectly in character.
Right.
He's one member of the House. It's not as though he's starting some sort of movement. There's no indication that he's starting some sort of movement. Nothing surprising about this.
Jennifer, I think what is extraordinary about it is, number one, that he's the only one. But number two, I mean, this is very directly contra to his political best interest, just in terms of keeping his seat, which seems to be what governs at least most Republican members of Congress.
Look, I think this is in character for him. He tends to be more libertarian than the rest of the Republican Party. He has set himself at odds with the party multiple times over the last few years. This is in character. But I think it is quite extraordinary that he has actually broken party lines on this. This has been extremely partisan, especially since the report came out. And I think it's patriotic that he was willing to say it out loud.
Does this put more pressure on Pelosi and co. to move forward with impeachment?
I actually don't. They're not going to take any direction from the Republican Party in general as a whole. There's no public appetite for it. And even though there are members of the Democratic Party that are clamoring for impeachment, as much as I would like to see impeachment, as much as some of the candidates would like to see impeachment, I think Nancy Pelosi knows best what is actually going to play to the American people right now, and impeachment is not it.
But Emily, all the reporting I've seen says that the Democratic members of Congress are actually clamoring for impeachment. And impeachment, we were talking about this earlier on the show, has caused Elizabeth Warren to significantly rise in the polls. So there does seem to be maybe not an overall public appetite, but a real yearning for it amongst the Democratic faithful.
Well, yeah, that's the problem, is when you look at polling, there is an appetite for it among Democrats. And if you're a Democratic member of Congress, of course, a lot of times you're being elected in centrist districts like purple districts going back and forth. Those are the members that probably don't want to talk about impeachment, even though the bases in their district probably do want them to be talking about impeachment. So the politics of it are really tricky. There's a lot of nuance, but I think Nancy Pelosi does know overall that it wouldn't play well with the entire public.
I also take issue with suggesting that Elizabeth Warren rose in the polls specifically because she was talking about impeachment. She has put out a pantheon of policy prescriptions.
Yeah, but that's
more than any other
part of her candidacy.
That's right, more than any other candidate, especially over the last 6 to 10 weeks. I think that is more indicative of her rise in the polls.
Well,
however,
she also, it's not like she just jumped. It's been this very slow, steady climb as people were kind of like, oh, and she has a child care plan. Oh, and the wealth tax. Oh, and this.
In fact,
and
somebody tweeted at her yesterday that they hoped that she had a plan for their love life, and she responded to DM her.
She
said, please DM me and we'll figure this out, which seems like a really good
social
campaign
media
slogan
up to
in
her
general.
interns and not herself.
I did DM her, by the way. I did DM her.
Wait, really? Oh, that's good.
She gave great advice.
Warren's love tips. Right. She does seem to have a lovely marriage with her husband, from what I can tell.
She does.
Another Democratic candidate who you may have heard of, former Vice President Joe Biden, had a big rally in Philly on Saturday. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
I believe Democrats want to unify this nation. That's what our party's always been about. That's what it's always been about, unity. If the American people want a president to add to our division, lead with a clenched fist, a closed hand, a hard heart, to demonize your opponent, to spew hatred, they don't need me. They've got President Donald Trump.
We should say Jennifer is advisor to Mayor Pete, so we know where your bread is buttered. However, what do you think of this message, the unity message? I mean, it seems to be working for him in the polls right now.
It does. It's a really good message. And I think that it was quite stark that he held this rally in Philadelphia for a number of reasons. Coming out of 2016, this is where the Democrats had their convention. This is ultimately where we had our heart broken.
Yeah.
You know, this is a lot of imagery here, and I think it was great. I think his message was great. I think if anybody had any doubts about the type of enthusiasm for a Biden candidacy, he put that to rest yesterday. I think it was an extremely impressive showing, and I think you're going to see him increase even more in the polls.
Sure.
Wow.
Emily, I'm curious. Do you think Biden's support is a mile wide and an inch deep? Because I was very struck by this, that only about 6,000 people came out for his official launch. Less than a third of the crowd that showed up for Kamala Harris, half the numbers that Sanders drew for his first rally, and a full 3,000 stood in a snowstorm to watch Amy Klobuchar. What does it say about the man who is leading the Democratic primary with overwhelming numbers only being able to pull out 6,000 people?
Well, this field is huge,
right.
and there's still a lot of voters who are undecided on top of there being a very splintered field to begin with. I am also very impressed with Biden. I think the Beltway media kind of misses his appeal in the same way that they've missed some of Trump's appeal, because there are a lot of voters that they just don't understand that would be interested in somebody like Joe Biden. I'm just continue to be impressed by his speeches. I think he's doing a great job. I think he comes across as more natural than I expected him to. I think he comes across, at least when he's giving speeches, as higher energy than I expected him to. But at the same time, I think it is possible that there's a ceiling for Joe Biden. It's so early, and I know that that's cliche to say here, but it's so early.
I mean, the other thing with Biden is he's kind of got a Teflon coating in the Democratic primary, because if you're going to challenge him on anything he did as vice president under Obama, you're going to be on that's very tough sledding. I mean, President Obama is very, 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 very popular with the Democratic primary electorate, and there's a lot of Obama nostalgia, and there are a lot of warm feelings around Joe Biden just because of the partner he was for Barack Obama when he was president.
Which is why I think you see a lot of the attacks coming from the far left of the Democratic Party about things preceding the Obama administration. So
Right.
they're
It's all
digging.
2006
They're,
and
they're,
1980.
that's right. They're digging
Right.
back 30 years. They're digging back 20 years. You're not going to hear a lot of criticism about what happened from 2008 forward. The other thing that people have to remember is that at times Joe Biden was more progressive than Barack Obama on issues, and he pushed the president
On marriage in
including
particular.
on marriage equality. So there's a lot of progressive bona fides here that VP Biden needs to discuss. But in terms of the crowd size, I think something that you said was more telling than very specific to Joe Biden is the fact that we're more than a year out from when this contest is even going to look like it might be decided, and we're already a year in from people having announced already. There's fatigue here, both in the primary electorate and the eventual general electorate already, and we're in 2019. So there's a long runway here in terms of people getting engaged in the process.
But Emily, the flip side of Democrats aren't going to go after him for what happened under the Obama administration. Republicans are not going to be similarly afraid to take on that era. And I do think that look, I would classify myself as a member of that far left, and there are things to criticize. I mean, the banks were bailed out, homeowners were left basically high and dry. No one was held accountable for the collapse that was engineered by the financial industry. I mean, those are all real things that happened, not to mention you had a massive trade deal that was very unpopular, which is part of why we ended up losing those Midwestern states.
Yeah.
So, the fact that he doesn't face that scrutiny now, does that leave him vulnerable if he were to end up in the general election?
I mean, absolutely. And the way he even talks about something like NAFTA is so different than the way President Trump talks about NAFTA.
Yeah, he's good with NAFTA.
Well, so that's why I think this matchup would be fascinating. A Biden-Trump matchup would be fascinating because there's just some subtle differences between them on some Rust Belt issues that would be really interesting to watch play out. I do think the Obama era could leave him vulnerable in the general election because exactly like you're talking about bank bailouts, foreign foreign policy. We forget the extent to which President Trump's take on foreign policy helped him in swing states. So absolutely, I think it's a vulnerability for him, general election.
Well, another thing we have to look at is Mayor Pete Buttigieg had his inaugural Fox News town hall. It received wild ratings, as I understand it, and he actually got a standing ovation at the end. Chris Wallace seemed particularly taken with the mayor. I want to turn this into a discussion about whether the Democrats should go on Fox News, because we've talked about this previously. Emily, do you think it was a smart decision for the mayor to appear? And it particularly puts him in contrast with Elizabeth Warren, who came out outwardly against the network, saying she won't participate in hate for profit.
Yeah, I think there's a very ignorant stereotype of Fox News viewers that's completely out of touch with reality. I think if you look at polling, there's a significant chunk of Fox News viewers that are interested in Democrats, that are interested in Joe Biden, that are interested in Elizabeth Warren. It is particularly mind-boggling for me that Elizabeth Warren refuses to do Fox News. I know she's trying to differentiate herself in a big Democratic primary that's in some ways a race to the left. But I mean, when you look at Trump voters, you probably get about 20% of them that would be interested in some of Elizabeth Warren's policy proposals.
Right.
So for her to completely shut out that audience, I think is completely stupid.
It's funny because she's attacking Tucker Carlson, who probably agrees with her on 90% of her policy proposals.
If she didn't just watch the clips that got circulated of Tucker, if she watched a full show of Tucker Carlson tonight, she'd be like,
she'd be like, wait a second, I agree with all of this.
But I don't know that she'd agree with all of it.
Yeah.
Going a little far. Jennifer, I actually agree with the analysis here, but I will say, in Elizabeth Warren's defense, I don't know that I would want to go on a network that calls me Pocahontas all day long and echoes the president's, racially tinged stereotype nickname of her. However, I just think about, I don't know whether it matters for the political campaign. I don't know how many Democratic primary voters you're really reaching on Fox News. But in this particular format, where you have one of the more serious journalists, you're getting asked real questions. You've got an audience there that you're able to win over. He was able to challenge. I mean, he called out Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham by name and said, it's the nature of grotesque things that you can't look away. So he got to challenge them in their house. I think that's good for the country.
It is good for the country, and I won't even pretend that I'm unbiased or objective when it comes to Mayor Pete. But he was the first one to go on the network during this entire season at all. Months ago, he went on the Sunday morning show, and all of the other candidates followed suit. You absolutely go on Fox News. I go on Fox News. A lot of other people go on Fox News, including Laura Ingraham's show, because if you do not show up to challenge that hate, if you do not show up to challenge that misinformation, then it is allowed to stay in the ether. And I think that Mayor Pete, as he often does these days, put it in the most perfect context when he said, perhaps there are some anchors who come at the news in bad faith, but there are majority of the viewers go to watch Fox News in good faith. They want information. They want facts. They want to understand the issues. And he is there to speak to them, because if we don't show up where the voters are and talk to them, including primary voters and general election voters right now, then we're going to be in big trouble. And if other candidates like Elizabeth Warren, don't want to go on Fox News, of course that's their prerogative. I think they're missing talking to a portion of the electorate, but it also doesn't indicate that they would fare well in debates against Donald Trump, because if they cannot, avoid being goaded into some type of response, or if they cannot handle being name called, or if they cannot, handle being in that space, then it's not going to fare well for them. And I think you're going to see more and more and more candidates, including Joe Biden, show up on Fox News. But I think the one thing that this does indicate in terms of how Mayor Pete fared on the network this morning, Morning Joe said that if nothing else, it is quite obvious that Mayor Pete is the future of the Democratic Party. But I think last night showed that he's actually quite the present.
Give us a little bit, though, of a peek behind the curtain, because he was rising quite steadily in the polls. Ever since Biden came in, he's kind of leveled off, maybe dropped a few points. What's the plan for combating, you've got Bernie, you've got Biden, you've got so many other candidates. How does he elevate himself out of the sort of scrum?
He continues to focus on his message alone. If you start to respond to other candidates, just as the way that he's not going to continue to respond to Donald Trump, he's not going to respond to what other candidates are doing. And though it seems that he's leveled off, he actually hasn't. There's a poll that came out the other day where he increased 5 points. That's the same amount that Elizabeth Warren increased in the same poll in the last 2 weeks. And she has been getting a lot more of the media attention. So if he continues this gradual increase.
How does he make gains with minority voters? Because that's been a point of criticism as well.
It's been a big point of criticism, and I think that once more of his story and more of his plans start to penetrate the media in different markets, including in the South, once he continues to build out his organization in South Carolina, once he continues to have meetings with community leaders and faith leaders, I think that you will see that start to change, because the story of South Bend is going to translate very well to the story of America in every region.
All right, Jennifer and Emily, thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Great having you both.
Thank you.
Coming up, a truly life-changing commencement address. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's comic book has to hang up the golden lasso.
And the Game of Thrones ending, I have many, many thoughts that I will share with you before we go.